Welcome to Voyage Daily Tech, the most important news personalized for you every day, supported by Voyage.com.
After listening to today's news, you'll know. First, Waymo's New York Robotaxi expansion was blocked by labour unions, despite an 85% lower injury crash rate. We'll analyse why this state-level defeat is a turning point and how it could affect Waymo's competitive dynamics against Chinese rivals. Second, Amazon faces lawsuits over suicide kits as Washington Supreme Court rules the platform has a duty of care. Today, we'll take a closer look at this landmark ruling and its implications for the legal liability of all major e-commerce platforms. Third, the US government launched Freedom.gov to help Europeans bypass EU content laws, escalating a tech policy clash. In this episode, we'll break down this controversial pivot in US internet policy and what it signals for future transatlantic tech regulation. Fourth, the Pentagon's new cybersecurity rule threatens its own supply chain as small businesses face six-figure compliance costs. So we'll discuss why this security mandate is paradoxically weakening the US defense industrial base and what it means for national security. Fifth, a $1.4 billion Blue Owl loan sale backfired, sparking fears that AI's disruption of software could trigger a private credit crisis. This discussion will reveal how AI's commoditization of software connects to financial instability and what it means for the private credit market. The story begins with a decision that caught everyone by surprise. New York just slammed the brakes on Waymo's Robotaxi expansion, dealing a stunning blow to the tech giant's plans. This isn't just a minor hiccup. You have to understand, Waymo recently closed a massive funding round, and this New York decision puts a huge question mark on their aggressive expansion plans. Access to the New York market, the largest and most lucrative ride-hailing market in the entire country, is critical for their long-term economics and for meeting investor expectations. Being locked out is a massive financial blow. Just 1 month after proposing to allow commercial robotaxis across the state, New York Governor Kathy Hochul has completely reversed course. The proposal was officially pulled after her office admitted the support from the legislature and stakeholders was simply not there. This is a major setback for Alphabet's Waymo, which called the decision disappointing. The move blocks the company from launching commercial services in key areas outside of New York City, a huge potential market. So, who stopped one of the biggest names in tech? The plan faced a wall of opposition from labour unions, rideshare drivers, and transit workers. The Taxi Workers Alliance, representing over 28,000 drivers, celebrated the move as a sensible decision. And, this isn't just a New York story. It's actually part of a national playbook. Labour unions are becoming a powerful force in shaping how autonomous vehicles are regulated across the country. For example, in California, unions won the right for over 800,000 rideshare drivers to unionise. And in Massachusetts, the Teamsters are actively pushing for laws that would require a human safety operator in every autonomous vehicle. So New York's decision isn't an outlier. It's a sign of a growing organised national movement. Their executive director, Bhairavi Desai, went on the record with a statement that reveals the core of this conflict. She said, "Waymo thinks by targeting Buffalo and Rochester, it can divide and conquer our driver-led movement, but once again, billionaire tech bosses underestimate workers at their own peril." Desai is pointing to a very real strategy, and it's worth breaking down. Tech companies like Waymo are deliberately targeting smaller, less dense cities like Buffalo and Rochester first. The reason is that these markets often have fewer regulatory hurdles and less powerful labour opposition compared to a massive union-heavy city like New York. It's a way to build momentum and establish a foothold before taking on the big political fights. We're seeing this pattern in places like Austin, Texas, and Miami, Florida, where the regulatory environment is much more welcoming. For now, Waymo's limited testing in Manhattan with human safety drivers will continue, but the company, which already provides 400,000 rides per week in cities like Phoenix and San Francisco, has hit a powerful roadblock in its national expansion plans. The situation presents a fascinating duality. On one side, you have data showing Waymo's driverless cars have an 85% lower rate of crashes that cause injuries compared to human drivers. On the other, high-profile incidents, like a Waymo car striking a child in Santa Monica, create fear and grab headlines, giving politicians all the political cover they need to hit the pause button. While Waymo vows to work with the state legislature to move forward, this fight is far from over. However, if you zoom out, you'll see another layer of strategy at play on the global stage. While Waymo is stuck fighting these state-by-state battles in the US, its international competitors are sprinting ahead. Chinese robotaxi companies like Baidu's Apollo Go are expanding at a breathtaking pace. They're already operating in dozens of Chinese cities and are now pushing into Europe and the Middle East thanks to strong government support and fewer regulatory roadblocks. This isn't just a fight for New York. It's a race for global dominance in a technology that will define the future. In the high-stakes battle for the future of transportation, New York just proved that organised opposition can still stop a tech giant in its tracks. Speaking of tech giants hitting roadblocks, Amazon is now facing lawsuits for selling what 28 families are calling suicide kits on its website. And the Washington Supreme Court just unanimously ruled that those lawsuits can proceed. This isn't about a product Amazon makes. This is about highly concentrated sodium nitrite, a chemical sold by third-party vendors on its platform. Now, you might know sodium nitrite is a common food preservative, often used in cured meats like bacon and hot dogs. But in food, it's used safely in extremely low concentrations. The products at the center of this lawsuit were sold at 98% or 99.6% purity. At that level of concentration, it is incredibly toxic. The lethal dose for an adult can be as low as 0.7 grams. That's less than a quarter of a teaspoon. The lawsuits allege that Amazon knew for years about the link between this product and suicide, yet continued to allow unrestricted sales. The cases involve the deaths of relatives as young as 17. But that's not the whole picture. The real turning point in the plaintiff's argument is Amazon's own algorithm. Their legal filings claim that when a user placed high-purity sodium nitrite in their cart, Amazon's recommendation system would then suggest other items like anti-nausea medication and even books on how to end one's life, effectively creating what the lawyers call a suicide kit. This is a core part of their argument that Amazon was not just a passive seller. A lower court had previously dismissed the negligence claims, but the state's highest court just delivered a stunning reversal. All 9 justices agreed that Amazon owed its customers a duty of reasonable care. And here's where the situation takes a more complex turn. The court declared that a jury, not a judge, should be the one to decide if suicide was a foreseeable result of Amazon's alleged failure to exercise that duty. The core of this ruling revolves around a legal concept called foreseeable harm. The plaintiffs argue that with Amazon's incredible power to analyse purchasing data in real time, the company should have been able to see these dangerous buying patterns. I mean, we know Amazon uses sophisticated machine learning to detect fraud by analysing user behaviour. The argument here is that the same technology could and should have been used to flag purchases that indicated a clear risk of self-harm. The family's lawyer didn't mince words, stating, Amazon is one of the world's biggest companies and shouldn't be profiting from products they know people use to harm themselves. Amazon says it disagrees with the decision, emphasising its commitment to customer safety and noting that the product is a legal preservative that can be misused. The company now prohibits sales of sodium nitrite with purity levels above 10%. When we place Amazon's delayed response alongside its competitors, the contrast becomes clear. eBay, for example, globally banned the sale of sodium nitrite back in 2019. Reports also show that Walmart and Etsy removed the chemical from their platforms once they became aware of its connection to suicides. This really highlights the different approaches these corporate giants take when balancing profit against public safety. But this ruling changes the game. It's one of the biggest challenges yet to the idea that online platforms aren't responsible for what third parties sell on their sites. So the thing is, for years, massive online platforms have operated in a legal grey area. Many people have heard of Section 230, which protects platforms from liability for third-party times, content asterisk, like posts or reviews. But this case is about times, products, asterisk, and the legal tide is turning. Just this year, the US Consumer Product Safety Commission ruled that Amazon can be considered a distributor under federal law, making it responsible for recalling hazardous products. This Washington Supreme Court decision builds on that momentum, forcing the issue of a platform's duty of care into the spotlight. The Washington Supreme Court has now affirmed that Amazon's duty of care can be put on trial, forcing one of the world's most powerful companies to answer for its role in front of a jury. We were just talking about a US court holding a tech giant accountable. Now, let's shift our focus to how the US government itself is navigating the global tech landscape, but in a way that's raising a lot of eyebrows. The United States government has built an online portal designed to let Europeans view content that is banned in their own countries, including alleged hate speech and terrorism. The site, Freedom.gov, is not run by the State Department. It appears to be administered by CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a branch of the Department of Homeland Security, and the target isn't censorship in places like China or Iran. The portal is designed to circumvent European regulations like the Digital Services Act, laws meant to curb illegal content. Believe it or not, this is part of a much larger regulatory clash between the US and the EU. The Digital Services Act, or DSA, places heavy responsibilities on big tech platforms to police illegal content, and major US tech companies see these rules as a threat to their business models. In fact, the Federal Trade Commission has reportedly advised companies like Meta and Google not to comply with the DSA if it compromises American free speech principles. So this government portal can be seen as a state-sponsored tool in what is essentially a proxy war for the tech industry. An expert who worked on previous US internet freedom projects described the new mission this way. This is very specifically to help, like, an angry man in Schoendorf see neo-Nazi tweets from a guy in Arkansas. What really brought this to a head was a statement from former US official and disinformation expert Nina Jankowicz, who stated that what the US government will be helping users access in Europe is, quote, essentially hate speech, pornography, and child sexual abuse material. This all appears to be a new front in an escalating battle between the Trump administration and the European Union over the regulation of big tech. This new portal is a sharp pivot away from the previous Internet Freedom Program, which gave over $500 million to grassroots groups that built privacy-preserving tools to fight censorship in authoritarian regimes. Now, get this, those old tools are now being gutted. That funding supported organisations like the Tor Project and Siphon, which provided secure, decentralised ways for journalists and activists in places like Iran, Myanmar, and Cuba to bypass state surveillance. With that funding gone, millions of people who relied on those tools to communicate safely are now left vulnerable. Instead of open source tools, Freedom.gov appears to funnel users into an opaque central system controlled by a US government agency. The old tools were decentralized, meaning traffic was scattered across many different points, making it very hard for anyone to track a specific user. This new system, though, is centralized. That means all the traffic goes through one government-controlled choke point. This dramatically increases the risk of surveillance, as CISA's very mandate includes monitoring network traffic. Jankowicz calls the site itself a propaganda tool and highlights the bizarre change in focus for the agency running it. CISA is the group that used to help fight foreign disinformation. Now, it appears the US government is alleging that our allies in Europe somehow pose a greater threat to Americans than the national security threats posed by Russia or China. From a controversial US tech policy affecting Europe, we now turn to one that's causing chaos right here at home. A new rule designed to protect America's military secrets is paradoxically threatening to break its supply chain. The Pentagon's new cybersecurity mandate, called the CMMC, is hitting the small businesses that build America's weapons so hard that many are considering walking away from defense work entirely. The problem is the cost. Industry sources report that compliance can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single small company. For a small machine shop, let's say one that does $2 million in revenue, with maybe $400,000 of that coming from defense work, the compliance bill could hit $200,000 or more. The math just doesn't work. For businesses with already fragile finances, it's a burden many can't afford. There's also widespread confusion over exactly what information needs this level of protection, leading to months-long waits for audits and total gridlock. Interestingly enough, the confusion isn't the fault of the small businesses. The government itself has been inconsistent in defining and marking what's called Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. This is the very data the rule is supposed to protect. So contractors are left guessing. If they overprotect information, they waste a fortune on unnecessary security. If they underprotect it, they risk a data breach and face massive legal and financial penalties. They are caught in an impossible situation. And if you think that's just a bureaucratic headache, you're wrong. According to Margaret Boatner of the Aerospace Industries Association, these complex and costly rules are, quote, forcing them to reconsider, if not exit the defense marketplace altogether, further challenging the health and resilience of the industrial base. This isn't a small problem. A staggering 88% of aerospace firms are small businesses. They are the backbone of the entire system. This isn't happening in a vacuum, you know. The Department of Defense itself projects that the number of small businesses in its industrial base has already fallen by over 40% in the last decade. So the CMMC mandate is throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. And the situation on the ground is getting precarious. One company, which is the sole source for a critical part on a US fighter jet program, says it has no idea if its own suppliers will comply with the new rules. The president of another US company says half of its suppliers have not indicated whether they will comply. This all begs the question, what happens if the only company that makes a part for a fighter jet just stops? Experts warn the CMMC requirements could inadvertently crush competition in the defense supply chain, leaving the nation more vulnerable. The real danger here is that it pushes the Pentagon toward a supply chain dominated by just a handful of giant companies. Think about this. Back in the 1990s, after a famous meeting called the Last Supper, the number of major US defense contractors shrank from over 50 down to just 5. Today, that number is still less than 10. When you have so few suppliers, you get less innovation, higher costs, and a supply chain so fragile that a single failure can ground an entire fleet. It's a massive national security risk. The very regulations intended to strengthen national security are creating a barrier that could weaken the industrial base that supports it. We were just talking about how a security rule could unintentionally weaken the defense supply chain. Now, let's look at another case of unintended consequences, this time in the high-stakes world of private credit, where a move meant to build confidence did the exact opposite. Direct lender Blue Owl sold a staggering $1.4 billion of its software loans to major investors. They sold them for 99.7% of their original value, a sign that sophisticated players thought the loans were rock solid. This should have been a massive vote of confidence. It wasn't. Instead, shares of Blue Owl and other asset managers went diving. Why? Because buried in the announcement was a bombshell change. The company was replacing its normal quarterly redemption program, effectively halting investor withdrawals in their current form. We previously analysed how in this opaque private credit system, structure changes can matter more than marks. And the latest development is that Blue Owl is shifting to mandated capital distributions funded by future asset sales. The market read that as a stop to redemptions under pressure, and it snowballed, especially layered on top of the broader tech sell-off. This structure, offering quarterly cash outs for assets that are tied up for years, is what experts call a liquidity mismatch. After all, these funds grew popular by promising regular investors a way to get into big private loans. But the promise of easy access to cash was always at odds with the reality that the underlying loans are fundamentally illiquid, often with maturities of 5 to 7 years. During a panic, if everyone rushes for the exit at once, the fund simply doesn't have the cash to pay them all. A while back, we walked through why this is so hard to manage in private credit. It's a nearly $3 trillion opaque, illiquid system with little standardized reporting, so the warning lights don't flash until it's late. One analyst put it bluntly, the optics are bad even if the loan book is fine. And as we've discussed before, in markets where price discovery is limited, optics can drive behavior just as much as fundamentals. The market is interpreting this as a forced move by a firm under pressure. Blue Owl's co-president Craig Packer went on the defense stating, "We're not halting redemptions, we're just changing the form," claiming they were actually accelerating payouts, but the fear was already spreading. Prominent economist Mohamed El-Erian publicly wondered if Blue Owl was a canary in the coal mine for a future crisis, comparing it to the Bear Stearns credit fund collapse that preceded the 2007 financial crisis. Now, that comparison to Bear Stearns is chilling, but it's important to see where it differs. The Bear Stearns funds that collapsed in 2007 were using massive leverage, sometimes borrowing $10 for every $1 of their own money, and they were invested in complex subprime mortgage assets. Blue Owl's leverage is much lower, and they are lending directly to companies, not buying complex securities. So while the structure of promising liquidity for illiquid assets is eerily similar, the underlying assets might not pose the same systemic risk to the entire financial system. The fear, however, is that for the fund itself, the outcome could be the same. Adding to the alarm, Scott Bessent said that he was concerned about risks migrating into the regulated financial system. So you might be wondering how this private market problem could spill over into the broader economy. Here's how. A huge buyer of this private credit is the insurance industry. Seeking higher yields, US. Life insurers now hold nearly $700 billion in these types of illiquid assets. That's almost 20% of their entire fixed income portfolio. A while back, we also broke down another transmission channel. A huge chunk of these loans are packaged into CLOs, where software is the single largest industry slice at over 11%. If defaults pick up, the first losses hit the riskiest tranches, often owned by pensions and insurers. Put that together, and you've got multiple paths into the savings vehicles people rely on. This is exposed to central tension in the massive private credit market. What happens when illiquid assets collide with a sudden demand for cash? It's created what one expert calls a self-fulfilling idea, where fear drives more withdrawals, forcing more sales, and pushing the stock down even further. And as we noted a while back, the opacity here makes that feedback loop harder to see and faster to bite. With over 70% of its loans concentrated in the software sector, Blue Owl is now at the center of a crisis of confidence. This brings us to the core fear that's really rattling investors. Why is a portfolio of software loans suddenly so scary? The answer, in a word, is AI. A while back, we talked about how real this substitution risk is. Klarna literally replaced around 1,200 SaaS tools, including Salesforce, with its own internal AI platform. And we walked through how enterprise AI, like Anthropic's Claude, can ingest entire code bases or thousands of pages of legal docs, letting companies rebuild workflows in-house. The rapid rise of artificial intelligence is commoditizing software. Basic functions that companies used to pay a lot for can now be done cheaply or even for free by AI tools. This is eroding the revenue of the very software companies that owe money to lenders like Blue Owl. One report shows that AI native software companies are seeing customers leave at a much higher rate. This isn't just a theory. UBS is projecting that this AI disruption could lead to a wave of defaults. In the private credit market, we flagged their range a while back. $75 to $120 billion in fresh corporate loan defaults by year end, and they're warning that this isn't a 2027 or 2028 issue. The last time we saw something this fast, we drew the parallel to the 2001 telecom bust overnight obsolescence, driving double-digit default rates, only this time the target is software. We're seeing Blue Owl's heavy bet on software, which once looked safe, now appearing uniquely fragile in the age of AI. At the same time, its competitors, like Ares and Apollo, have kept their software exposure much lower, around 6 to 10%, choosing to diversify, and the numbers tell the story. The company's stock is down more than 50% in the past year.
That's it for today on Voyage Daily Tech. Follow, share, and stay tuned for daily updates coming your way tomorrow.